My name is Ethan, and I've always considered my life to be a good one. At 39, I live in a comfortable home and hold a small stake in a construction company. While my role as a junior partner hasn't made me rich, it has provided a stable, satisfying life for my wife, Clara, and me. After 8 years of marriage, we may not have children, but our partnership has always felt solid, or so I believed. Clara has been the center of my world. She's a dreamer, someone whose love for books goes beyond reading. She collects them and even writes her own short stories. For years, she's spoken of a dream that blends her passions, opening a book-themed cafe. It would be a warm, inviting place where people could enjoy coffee, homemade pastries, and the company of a good book, a space for connection, relaxation, and shared joy among book lovers. That dream began to take shape about a year ago when Clara found the perfect location in one of the city's upscale areas. It was a charming corner shop with large, bright windows and a cozy atmosphere that matched her vision perfectly. The rent was high, and the renovations were expensive, but I reassured her that we could manage. To help her get started, I withdrew from my savings and took out a small loan. When she opened the doors to books and brews, it was as though her vision had come to life. The walls were lined with bookshelves, the air smelled of fresh brewed coffee and flaky pastries, and customers immediately fell in love with the cafe. Seeing Clara thrive there, greeting visitors and chatting about their literary interests, filled me with pride. It felt like my support had helped her build something truly meaningful. But lately, things have started to feel off. The changes came gradually at first. Clara seemed distracted, as though her mind was somewhere else, even when she was sitting beside me. She began spending increasing amounts of time at the cafe, often staying late to handle one issue or another. I didn't think much of it. Running a new business is demanding, but then the little things started to pile up. She became distant, as if her affection for me had waned. I began noticing that she put extra effort into her appearance, choosing dresses I hadn't seen in years, and taking longer than usual to get ready before heading out. I told myself I was overthinking it. Maybe she was just trying to make a good impression on customers, or perhaps the pressures of running the cafe were weighing on her. But as the weeks passed, an unease grew within me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something more was happening. Everything came to a head one evening. It was a Thursday, and I was lounging on the couch with coffee in hand, catching up on a game I'd missed. Clara walked in holding a bouquet of vibrant yellow roses. The sight made me pause. "You bought flowers?" I asked, surprised. It wasn't like her to bring home flowers on a whim. She smiled softly, her cheeks slightly flushed. "No, they're not from me," she replied, setting the roses on the kitchen counter. "They're from a regular at the cafe. His name's Victor. He wanted to thank me for recommending a book." The air seemed to shift. "A recommendation?" I asked, trying to sound unaffected. "Yeah," she said lightly. "He's a big fan of historical fiction, so I suggested the Civil War novel that doesn't get much attention. He loved it, and I guess the flowers were his way of showing gratitude." Her casual tone unsettled me, but what bothered me most was the faint smile lingering on her face. "Victor," I echoed, testing the name aloud. "Have you mentioned him before?" Clara nodded as she arranged the roses in a vase. "He's been coming in regularly for a couple of months. He's just one of those people who stands out, really charismatic and interesting to talk to. He's incredibly well-read. Honestly, it's fascinating." The admiration in her voice twisted something deep within me. It wasn't a tone she used often, not even when talking about the cafe. Forcing a laugh, I asked, "Charismatic, huh? What does he do?" "A lawyer," she replied casually, "and an amateur historian. He's traveled a lot. You'd probably like him, Ethan." Those words stung in a way I couldn't quite explain. She turned to face me, and for the first time, I think she noticed my expression. Her smile faded slightly. "You're not upset about the flowers, are you?" she asked, stepping closer. "They're just a nice gesture. We talk about books and small things. That's all." Her words were reassuring, but I saw something flicker in her eyes, uncertainty, perhaps guilt. She squeezed my shoulder, offering a smile. "There's nothing to worry about, I promise." I forced a smile of my own and lied. "It's fine. I trust you." She kissed my cheek and moved on to another topic, but my thoughts lingered on Victor. Over the following weeks, Clara's behavior only grew more difficult to dismiss. She came home later than ever, always with a vague explanation. A broken coffee machine, an employee needing help, or getting caught up in conversation. Each reason seemed harmless, but together, they painted a picture I couldn't ignore. Clara's phone became her constant companion, buzzing frequently with messages she never explained. I stayed silent, never confronting her. But the uncertainty was eating away at me. The late nights, her distant gaze, the gnawing feeling that I was losing her. It was like watching our marriage unravel in slow motion. Then one night, when Clara came home well past midnight, mumbling another weak excuse about managing inventory, I reached my breaking point. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. I needed answers. I never thought I'd be the kind of man who would consider hiring a private investigator, but I also never imagined I'd feel so adrift in my own marriage, doubting every word and smile from the woman I loved. At first, I thought I could handle it alone. Maybe I'd follow her after work or drop by the cafe unannounced, but my job had other plans. New contracts at the firm demanded my full attention, and as a junior partner, I couldn't afford to lose focus. Admitting that I couldn't manage this on my own, I started searching for help. After some research, I found Nathan Brooks, a private investigator with stellar reviews and a reputation for professionalism and discretion. His website was simple and to the point, exactly what I was looking for. With a mix of hesitation and desperation, I picked up the phone and made the call. The glowing testimonials had set my expectations high, and I clung to their promises like a lifeline. The next morning, I scheduled a meeting with Nathan. His office was tucked away in a nondescript downtown building. So easy to miss, it might as well have been invisible unless you were specifically looking for it. Nathan himself looked like a man in his mid-40s, his sharp eyes tempered by an air of quiet composure that strangely put me at ease. His attire was a simple gray suit, nothing ostentatious, but it radiated competence and professionalism. Once I laid out my situation, Nathan leaned back in his chair and scrutinized me with a calm, measured gaze. "So," he began, his tone even, "you suspect your wife might be unfaithful, but you lack definitive proof. Her recent behavior feels off, and it's causing you to worry." "That's exactly it," I said, my voice heavy with frustration. "I can't confront her without evidence, but I also can't keep living in this state, always sensing something's off and never knowing the truth." Nathan nodded in understanding. "You're not the first person to come to me with these doubts, Ethan. Many others have been in your shoes. Sometimes the fear turns out to be a misunderstanding." He paused, his gaze steady on mine. "And other times, it doesn't. My job is to give you the clarity you need." We spent the next hour reviewing every detail. Her daily habits, her sudden cafe visits, and the name Victor, which I mentioned almost absent-mindedly. Nathan took careful notes, his pen gliding efficiently across a small, tidy notebook as he outlined his approach. Discreet surveillance, meticulous fact-finding, and regular progress updates. "You'll have to be patient," he warned as I stood to leave. "The truth takes time, but I promise I'll uncover it for you." As I shook his hand, a strange mix of apprehension and relief settled over me. For the first time in what felt like forever, I had a plan. The following weeks crawled by at a maddening pace. I threw myself into work, desperately trying to block out the thoughts of what Nathan might uncover. Whenever Clara came home late or seemed distant, I reminded myself to stay calm. Nathan was on it. Then, about 3 weeks in, Clara burst through the front door one evening, brimming with uncontainable excitement. "You won't believe what happened today," she exclaimed, her voice sparkling with energy. I set down what I was doing, bracing myself. What is it? I lost my phone earlier. It must have fallen out of my bag while I was out grocery shopping, she said. I didn't even realize it until someone called the cafe to say they'd found it. Can you imagine? Some stranger went out of their way to get it back to me. That's pretty lucky, I said, keeping my tone neutral despite the suspicion prickling at my mind. I know, right? She continued, her excitement growing. I thought I'd have to replace the whole thing, but the guy just handed it back, smiled, and wouldn't even accept a reward. Can you believe it? Such a good person. Her expression radiated gratitude, but my thoughts were spinning. Could Nathan have staged this? Was it a ploy to access her phone or track where she'd been? The coincidence was too clean to ignore. I didn't press the issue, but it only made me more anxious for answers. Whatever Nathan had discovered, it felt like the truth was inching closer. The call came on a Wednesday morning while I was at work, the din of construction all around me. Ethan, Nathan's voice was steady and professional, almost detached. I've got what you need. Can you come by today? My pulse quickened, and the rest of the day passed in a fog. I replayed every interaction, every quiet moment with Clara. I tried to steel myself for what I might hear, but nothing could have prepared me for the reality that evening. Nathan sat across from me and pushed a slim folder toward me. Take your time, he said softly. We'll go through this together. I hesitated before opening it, my hands unsteady as I flipped through the contents. At first, the images seemed harmless. Clara sitting at a cafe with a man I presumed to be Victor, both of them smiling, leaning in close as though sharing an inside joke. The next photo stung. They were seated at an upscale restaurant, their hands intertwined across the table, an unmistakable intimacy that made my stomach turn. And then I saw the picture that shattered everything. On a crowded city street, Victor's arm was wrapped around Clara's waist, and she tilted her face up to kiss him. The air seemed to rush out of my lungs. I looked away, my breathing ragged. There's more, Nathan murmured. He reached for a tablet and brought up a folder of messages. I managed to access her texts. Each line on the screen felt like another blow. Victor, I can't stop thinking about you. Soon, I hope. I miss you. On and on it went. Flirtatious exchanges, whispered plans to meet, and tender declarations. Words that should have been meant for me. My head spun. How had I ended up here? I had given her everything, my love, my trust, the money to get her cafe up and running. And this was how she repaid me. Anger, shame, and hurt twisted together in a suffocating knot. I forced myself to blink back tears, unwilling to break down. You okay, Ethan? Nathan's voice was gentle, his expression concerned. I swallowed hard and nodded. Yeah, thank you. I needed this. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, tormented by memories of Clara's laughter and her bright smile on the day the cafe opened. I couldn't reconcile that version of her with the woman in Nathan's photos. By the time dawn crept through the window, my grief had hardened into determination. If she was willing to destroy our marriage for Victor, I wouldn't let her take advantage of me any longer. I made an appointment with Rachel Simmons, a formidable divorce attorney renowned for her no-nonsense approach to complex cases. Mr. Moore, she greeted me, her voice calm and professional. How can I assist you? I explained everything, handing her Nathan's folder. She examined the photos and messages carefully, her face giving nothing away. You're in a strong position, she said finally. This state doesn't assign fault for divorce, but evidence of infidelity will give you leverage in asset negotiations. And the cafe? I asked. I invested most of the money. I can't let her walk away with everything. Rachel nodded decisively. If you can provide proof that you are the primary financial contributor, we can fight for a larger share of the assets. Gather all the documentation you have, bank statements, receipts, anything that shows your investment. Her pragmatic approach steadied me, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was regaining control over my life. We spent countless hours analyzing our strategy, focusing on minimizing Clara's potential claims while safeguarding the assets I had worked so relentlessly to build. As the meeting drew to a close, Rachel studied me with a quiet intensity. "Ethan," she said gently, "this isn't easy, but it's the right decision. You owe it to yourself to move forward." I nodded, her words lingering in my mind as I left. On the drive home, I was consumed by a complicated mix of grief and determination. The road ahead was bound to be turbulent, but I knew I was ready for it. Clara had made her choices, and it was time for me to make mine. The following weeks felt like living in an alternate reality. I wore the mask of normalcy, smiling when necessary, sitting through dinners with her, and enduring her affectionate gestures as though nothing had shifted. To Clara, life carried on seamlessly, but inside, I was unraveling. I pulled apart the pieces of our history and asked myself how it had all led to this. Behind the scenes, the wheels were turning. Rachel and I worked in tandem, compiling financial records, organizing evidence, and preparing the divorce papers. I spent hours agonizing over decisions, even about Clara's cafe. Eventually, I chose to let her keep it. Without my support, I doubted it would last, and I wanted to make a clean exit. When Rachel finally handed me the completed papers, an unexpected calm washed over me. She offered to deliver them herself, but I shook my head. "No," I said quietly. "This is something I need to do." That evening, I sat in the living room, the folder heavy on the coffee table, waiting for Clara to come home. When she arrived, her face lit up brighter than I'd seen in weeks. "Hey," she said cheerfully, placing her bag down and walking toward me. "You look so serious. What's going on?" I straightened up, my voice measured. "I've been waiting for you. We need to talk." Her smile faltered, a shadow of unease crossing her expression. "What's wrong?" she asked, sitting next to me and resting her hand softly on mine. "Clara," I replied evenly, maintaining my composure, "there won't be any more money. In fact, I have something for you." I picked up the folder and handed it to her. She frowned, opening it to glance at the contents. I watched as the reality hit her, the blood draining from her face. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice faint. "What is this?" "It's exactly what it looks like," I said. "I'm filing for divorce." She froze, staring at me as though she couldn't process the words. Then she shook her head, her voice breaking with disbelief. "Divorce? Why? What are you even talking about? What did I do?" I met her shocked gaze and took a steady breath. "Clara, I can't pretend anymore. Something's been wrong for a while. You've been distant. Your actions don't add up. I feel like you're being unfaithful." Her face turned pale, her voice shaking. "Cheating," she breathed. "How can you think that, Ethan? I would never. You're wrong. You have to believe me." She clutched the folder close to her chest, as if to shield herself from its contents. "This doesn't make sense," she pleaded, tears forming in her eyes. "You're my husband. We can fix this. We still love each other." I stood, creating distance between us. "I loved you, Clara," I said calmly, "but I can't keep carrying this alone. I've made my decision." Her tears escalated into sobs, her voice rising with desperation. "You're ending everything over a suspicion you don't even have proof? Ethan, this is insane." Without another word, I turned and walked toward the bedroom. Her cries echoed behind me, raw and anguished, but I didn't look back. My chest ached with the weight of it all, but my resolve held firm. I closed the door behind me, exhaling deeply. This wasn't how I'd ever envisioned our marriage ending, but it had to be done. Whatever came next, I was ready to face it. The courtroom was sterile and unyielding, its harsh lighting casting stark shadows on the walls. Observers sat quietly on worn benches, and legal teams murmured among themselves. Across the room, Clara sat stiffly at her table, her face flickering between despair and defiance. Her eyes sought mine repeatedly, as though hoping to find a trace of the man she once knew, a chance to turn things around. I stared ahead, keeping my face expressionless. The judge, an older woman with a commanding presence, brought the room to order. Violet's lawyer spoke first, portraying her as a devoted wife blindsided by my actions. When Violet took the stand, her voice trembled. "Your Honor," she began, her eyes darting between the judge and me. "I love my husband. I don't know why he's doing this. He's pushed me away, but I think he's going through something. I'm just asking for time. We've been married for 8 years. That doesn't just disappear." For a brief moment, guilt gripped me, but Rachel's clear, steady voice cut through the silence. "Your Honor, while my client respects the years shared with Mrs. Moore, the marriage has been irrevocably damaged. The evidence will show Mrs. Moore's infidelity." The first images appeared Violet and Charles at the cafe, seemingly innocent. Then came the pictures from the restaurant, the two of them close, hands entwined across the table. Her lawyer sprang to object. "Your Honor, this is circumstantial. Mrs. Moore interacts with many clients. This individual, Charles, is no different. These images prove nothing inappropriate." The judge acknowledged the objection, but allowed Rachel to proceed. Then Rachel presented the final image, Violet and Charles on a crowded street, their lips pressed together in an unmistakable kiss. A ripple of quiet shock passed through the room. The judge's voice was sharp. "Mrs. Moore, would you like to explain this?" Violet hesitated, her composure fracturing as she stammered. It's not what it looks like. Charles he's just a friend, a client, someone I talked to. We had fallen into a moment that was fleeting yet devastating. A moment that, contrary to what she claimed, was not without consequence. Beneath the table, my fists clenched, frustration simmering as Violet tried to dismiss months of betrayal as if they were nothing. Rachel remained steady, her tone unshaken, as she revealed message after message. There was no ambiguity, no space for excuses. Every secret meeting, affectionate word, and carefully laid plan was now exposed for all to see. By the time Rachel finished, the cracks in Violet's facade were impossible to miss. Her expression was pale, her earlier confidence entirely eroded. The judge regarded her with a firm, measured look, one that carried both disappointment and a hint of sympathy. "Mrs. Moore," she began, her voice even but resolute, "this evidence is irrefutable. Your actions clearly meet the legal definition of infidelity." From there, the proceedings turned practical, focusing on the division of assets. It was here that my preparation proved its worth. Rachel methodically detailed the financial contributions I had made to our marriage, the steps I had taken to secure my investments, and my decision to relinquish ownership of the cafe. "Mr. Moore understands that the cafe is his wife's passion," Rachel explained calmly. "Despite his substantial role in establishing it, he does not wish to claim it." The judge nodded in approval, and for a fleeting moment, I caught the shock on Violet's face. She hadn't anticipated such a gesture. However, when Rachel proposed selling the house and splitting the proceeds, Violet's expression shifted. The house was the one thing she truly wanted to keep, but Rachel laid out the financial impossibility of her doing so. Ultimately, the judge ruled in my favor across the board. When it was finally over, I knew I had safeguarded what mattered most. My assets were secure, the house was set to be sold, and Violet retained the cafe. In the days that followed, Violet's attempts to contact me became relentless. She called, left messages, and even appeared at my office unannounced. Her desperation was palpable. One evening, after days of ignoring her, I finally answered the phone. "Ethan," she began, her voice trembling with emotion. "I made a mistake. I didn't realize what I had until it was gone. Please, let's start over." But reconciliation was impossible. Trust, the very foundation of any relationship, was irreparably shattered. "I can't trust you, Violet," I said, my voice firm and unwavering. "You lied to me for months. You can't just erase that and expect everything to go back to how it was. Her pleas dissolved into tears, but my decision was final. The trial had ended our story, and I wasn't about to rewrite it. The process of selling the house was painful. It had been the cornerstone of our marriage for 8 years, a place where we had once shared joy, love, and the illusion of happiness. Yet, as I signed the papers and watched Violet receive her share of the proceeds, I felt an unexpected sense of closure. The house was no longer a home. It had become nothing more than a symbol of an ending. Predictably, Violet used her share of the money to pour back into the cafe. She expanded the menu, hired additional staff, and made every effort to revive her dream. For a while, it seemed to work. On mornings when I drove by, I'd see customers bustling in and out, and despite everything, I silently hoped she might succeed. But the success was short-lived. It wasn't long before cracks began to show. Without my financial support, Violet struggled to keep the business afloat. She resorted to loans to cover mounting expenses, but it was a losing battle. Customers began to complain about slow service, inconsistent quality, and the lack of Violet's once vibrant presence. By then, Charles had vanished from her life. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned the truth. He'd been married with children all along. His affair with Violet had shattered his own family, leading to a messy fallout. Desperate to repair his marriage, he severed all ties with Violet, leaving her to deal with the fallout of her decisions. She had wagered everything, her marriage, her stability, and even her future, on him, and she lost. I thought I would feel some sense of vindication, but instead, all I felt was pity. Watching her unravel wasn't satisfying. It only served as a reminder of how fragile everything we build can be. As for me, I chose to start over. I rented a small apartment closer to the city, threw myself into my work, and reconnected with friends I had neglected for far too long. At first, being alone felt foreign, as though I had forgotten how to exist without someone beside me. But slowly, I began to adapt. I didn't rush into anything new. The wounds from my marriage were still raw, and I needed time to rediscover myself outside the role of Violet's husband. I embraced a simpler, quieter kind of life, one focused on my own well-being. Weekends became an opportunity to escape into nature, with hiking trails replacing arguments and tension. Bit by bit, I rebuilt my life on my own terms. Life moves forward, and so did I. Perhaps one day, I'll meet someone who values trust and loyalty the way I do. But for now, I'm content. The scars of my marriage serve as a quiet reminder of the lessons I've learned, and the peace I've found assures me that I made the right decision. Sometimes, the end of one story is merely the beginning of another.